Somewhere in your past, there is an animal you hurt, almost certainly when you were a kid. You threw rocks at seagulls in a parking lot, you pulled a nest apart to see what was inside, you swung at somebody's dog that came too close, you chased a cat into the road because the way it ran was funny. You remember it in pieces, a few frames at a time, and you have almost certainly never once felt bad about it. The question is whether the other side remembers. People have studied this seriously, and the answer is uglier than it is comfortable to assume. Some animals hold on to one specific human face for years. Worse, they pass it along. Neighbors learn about you from a witness. Chicks learn from their parents. The grudge travels through generations like a rumor. It outlives the person who caused it and the animal that recorded it. The creature that comes at you one day may have nothing to do with your childhood at all. People have been telling stories like this for thousands of years. The elephant that came back to the village. The tiger that waited for the man who shot it. The whale that picked one boat out of 100. Every one of them lands in the news immediately, because it lands on something inside you. You want to believe the world keeps score, that if you hurt something with no lawyer, no police, and no language to complain in, the bill still gets sent. By the end of this, you will know exactly which creature on this planet actually takes revenge, and why that ability produced a great deal more than cruelty. One man in the Russian forest got the complete answer to that question. In the winter of 1997, from a single shot. Primordia, a narrow strip of forest in the Russian Far East, wedged between China and the sea. 40 below zero, the one temperature where Celsius and Fahrenheit finally agree on something. The man's name was Vladimir Markov, poacher, hunter, one of those people who survive out there on whatever the forest allows them to take. In the version the journalist John Vallant later laid out in his book The Tiger, Markov came across an Amur tiger standing over a fresh kill. He fired, wounded the animal, and took the meat for himself. Functionally the same thing you did to that seagull at 8 years old, except the other party weighed 600 pounds, lives about 20 years, and remembers all of it. What happened next is why people still repeat this story. The tiger did not leave. It found Markov's cabin and took the inside apart. It shredded the mattress, dragged his belongings across the floor, and destroyed everything that carried his smell. Then it lay down nearby and waited. Judging by the tracks, it waited for hours. When Markov came back, he had no chance. The man who came to investigate was an inspector named Yuri Trush, from a unit that dealt with tigers and poachers. He saw what was left of Markov, and he saw the tracks around the cabin. They were the tracks of an animal that had not paced or panicked, but had chosen a position. About 2 weeks later, the same tiger killed another man in the same area. Trush tracked it down and shot it. In the book, everything lines up. The injury, the hunt, the ambush, the payment. The problem is that nobody saw this tiger between Markov's shot and the ambush at the cabin. The beginning is known and the ending is known, and the middle was filled in by the person telling the story. 23 years later, almost the same thing played out in the ocean, except that time there were scientists watching from the start. Since May of 2020, orcas in the Strait of Gibraltar have been ramming yachts. They come up from underneath, hit the rudder, circle the boat for as long as 2 hours, and leave once the rudder breaks. The Spanish biologist Alfredo Lopez Fernandez suggested it all started with one adult female, nicknamed White Gladys. She may have survived a collision with a vessel or gotten tangled in fishing gear, and the younger animals picked up the habit from her. The word revenge went around the world's press in a day. Unlike the tiger story, there is plenty of data here. Roughly 700 recorded incidents, 7 boats sunk, about 15 individuals out of the 45 in this population. And in August of 2023, 36 specialists in whales and dolphins signed an open letter stating plainly that nothing supports the revenge version. Their arguments are simple. Nearly all of the ramming orcas are juveniles, and White Gladys herself is absent from most of the incidents. In 5 years, not one person has been hurt, even though an orca could sink a boat full of people in minutes. And what they break is specifically the rudder, the moving, vibrating, most interesting part on the bottom of a hull. Andrew Trites of the University of British Columbia put it most bluntly. Ramming a boat makes about as much sense for an orca as it would for him to sprint into a brick wall. What both stories have in common is that the animal acts inside a short window. The tiger, a few days. The orca, a couple of hours per encounter. But there are cases where an animal behaved like an avenger, not for hours, but for years. Those are much harder to wave away. The orca Tilikum was captured off the coast of Iceland in November of 1983. He was about 2 years old. As an adult, he weighed more than 12,000 pounds. Over 27 years in tanks, he was involved in 3 human deaths, the last of them the trainer Don Brancho in February of 2010. Next to that sits a fact that turns the whole picture over. In the entire history of observation in the open ocean, there is not one documented case of a wild orca killing a human being. Not one. Orcas end up within a few feet of boats, divers, and surfers constantly, and they never touch them. A wild orca covers up to 100 miles a day and lives in a family it never leaves. Tilikum was taken from his mother at 2 years old and put into a volume of water he could cross in a few seconds. Something similar, and even clearer, happened with elephants in South Africa. Through the 80s and 90s, young elephants orphaned by Kulls and Kruger were moved into Pilanesberg National Park. They grew up without adult bulls, without the animals that normally keep teenagers in line. They entered must, the hormonal peak of aggression, more than 10 years early, at 18 instead of 28, and those teenagers started killing white rhinos. They knocked them down and finished them with their tusks. By the estimate in the paper by Slotow and Van Dyke, as many as 49 animals. The fix turned out to be almost comically simple. A few adult bulls were brought into the park. Must in the young males shut down, and the killings nearly stopped. Not one of those elephants was avenging its mother. What got called revenge was the aftermath of something people had done. Rage can run for years and have nothing to do with you personally, and sometimes it does not even need a reason. A smell is enough. When a bee stings, it releases an alarm pheromone along with the stinger, and the main component of it smells like banana. That smell marks a spot on your skin, and the next bees fly to exactly that spot. You run, and the swarm stays with you, because you are carrying the mark. From the outside, it looks like a coordinated punishment, as if the hive identified the guilty party and handed down a ruling. In reality, not one of those bees knows anything about you, and none of them could. A brain the size of a sesame seed holds no record of your face and no history of your conflict. It is flying toward a banana. And here is what makes this example final. A honeybee that stings loses the stinger along with part of her abdomen and dies. She pays for the strike with everything she has. By any reading, that should look like the highest form of revenge, a self-sacrifice for the sake of hurting an enemy. But what she is paying for is a chemical marker on somebody's skin rather than a grudge, because she does not have one. That is why the great revenge stories collapse one after another. Rage is not required to remember you. An elephant, a tiger, and a bee need neither to recognize you nor to hold on to what exactly you did. So it all comes down to memory. The ability to pull one face out of billions and store it together with what that face did to you. And this is where animals suddenly stop losing. In 2006, the ornithologist John Marsloff at the University of Washington put on a rubber caveman mask, trapped 7 American crows on campus, banded them, and let them go. Nothing was done to them. They were held briefly and released. After that, the researchers started walking the campus in 2 masks, that one and a neutral one, for which they used a rubber face of the sitting United States vice president. The crows had no reaction to the vice president. At the sight of the caveman, they screamed, gathered, and dove. Then it got genuinely strange. The number of birds attacking the mask kept growing. At the peak of one walk, 47 of the 53 crows Marsloff passed scolded him, when only 7 had ever been caught. The other 40 learned about the dangerous face from neighbors and parents rather than from their own experience. The mechanism is simple and unsettling for exactly that reason. One crow sees the mask and starts a specific alarm call. Neighbors fly in to see what she's calling about, catch sight of the face, and file it away together with somebody else's panic. The next spring, their chicks sit beside them and learn the same thing, not from their own pain, but from a parent's scream. The grudge spreads across the campus the way gossip spreads in a small town, and with every retelling, the man in the mask has more enemies. They turned the mask upside down. They hid it under a hat. They put it on people of different heights and both sexes. The crows identified the face every time. Then the team did something that rarely works with a wild bird. They scanned a crow's brain. At the sight of the threatening face, the amygdala lit up, the same structure that handles fear and the emotional coloring of memory in you. You may not be able to recall what happened last Tuesday, but the face of someone who once hurt you comes back instantly, along with everything you felt at the time. In a crow, it works the same way, in the same part of the brain. Except the crow attacks the mask the second it sees it. It does not hold off, does not pick a moment, does not prepare a strike. And the tiger in that forest, if the book is right, could do exactly that. Wait. The waiting turned up somewhere else, in a zoo in the Swedish town of Furuvik. A chimpanzee named Santino lived there, born in 1978, the dominant male of his group. It started with him throwing stones at visitors. Plenty of primates throw things, so there was nothing unusual about that. What was unusual is what Matthias Osvath of Lund University noticed once he started watching systematically. Santino was collecting ammunition in advance. Early in the morning, before the zoo opened, when there was not a single person on the grounds and nobody to be angry at, he would calmly walk the edge of the moat, fish out stones, and stack them in caches along the shore, on the side where the visitors would later stand. 5 caches, 3 to 8 stones in each. When stones ran short, he tapped his knuckles across the concrete surface of the island, found the places where moisture had separated the concrete from below, and broke off flat, even discs. He was manufacturing projectiles. Then the zoo opened, the people arrived, and Santino opened fire from his stockpile. After that, he took another step. He began hiding the projectiles under hay and behind logs, closer to the public, and he stopped signaling the threat in advance. He used to raise his hair and scream, and now he walked up calmly and threw without warning. He had worked out that the warning was costing him hits. Morning Santino was completely calm. He was preparing for a state he was not in yet, for an event that had not happened. People still argue about it. Osvath believed the ape was mentally traveling into his own future, and his opponents answered that he had simply learned a sequence that paid off. There is no way to settle it now. Santino was killed in December of 2022, but what he was preparing for was a crowd. Anyone who walked up to the fence. And revenge always has a name attached to it. The closest anyone has come to a bill with a name on it is not the great apes. It is macaques. In 1992, Filippo Orelli and his colleagues described a behavior in Japanese macaques they called kin-oriented redirection. It works like this. One monkey attacks another. The one who lost does not go after the attacker because he is stronger, and that would be suicide. Instead, within roughly an hour, she finds one of his relatives, usually younger and weaker, and attacks that one. The victim's own family does the same thing. The blow comes back not to the one who threw it, but to his family, and it rests on serious numbers. Later work sorted through more than 15,000 aggressive episodes, and the pattern held. From the outside, it looks like a functioning blood feud, with families keeping accounts against each other and payment arriving late and at the wrong address. There is one detail here worth stopping on. To hit your attacker's nephew, you have to know that he is the nephew. A macaque carries a map of other animals' family ties in her head. Whose son, whose sister, who is allied with whom. You do exactly the same thing every time you sit at a table and work out whose husband is sitting across from you. But Orelli put a question mark in his title, an expression of a revenge system, question mark. He put it there on purpose. The 1-hour window is too short. In long-tailed macaques, the effect is strongest in the first minute after the fight. This is anger that has not cooled yet and is looking for somewhere to go, rather than a decision made with a clear head a week later. The monkey knows who is guilty and hits the weaker one anyway. As long as the injury was done to you personally, things more or less work. The wall starts where the injury is done to somebody else. That question was tested on chimpanzees, because there is nobody closer to a human to test. In 2012, Katrin Riedel, Keith Jensen, Joseph Call, and Michael Tomasello published the results of work with 13 chimpanzees. The setup was simple. One ape has food on a movable platform, and a dominant animal watching has a rope that collapses the platform and drops the food where nobody gets it. Doing harm is allowed, but harm is never free, because you get nothing out of it either. When the dominant's own food was stolen, he pulled the rope and collapsed the platform on the thief. Retaliation worked reliably. When food was stolen from somebody else in front of him, he did nothing, even when the victim was his own relative. He watched an injustice that did not involve him personally, and he did not move. The author's conclusion was dry. Unlike humans, chimpanzees do not engage in third-party punishment. Frans de Waal, who spent his career arguing that apes have morality, responded carefully. A negative result, he said, is still a result in science, but it has to be handled with caution, because the absence of a behavior in one experiment does not mean it is absent everywhere. In 14 years, nobody has managed to overturn it. Next to this sits a famous experiment that seems to say the opposite. In 2003, Sarah Brosnan and Franz de Waal showed capuchin monkeys refusing to work for a cucumber once a neighbor started getting a grape for the same job. The insulted monkey threw the cucumber back at the experimenter. Something similar was later found in dogs in Vienna and in wolves. But several research groups failed to reproduce it, and a more modest explanation goes like this. The animal sees a grape, expects a grape, does not get one, and gets angry about the broken expectation. Either way, it is reacting to its own loss. This is exactly the line you cross every time somebody else's trouble becomes your business. Except that ability costs an obscene amount, so much that evolution almost nowhere pays for it. In 1964 and 1970, the British biologist William Hamilton sorted every social act into 4 types using one very simple test: who gains and who loses. If you lose and the other one gains, that is altruism. If you gain and the other one loses, that is selfishness. If both gain, that is mutual benefit. And there is a 4th box, the strangest one. You lose and the other one loses. Both down. Hamilton called it spite. Revenge lives in that 4th box. Picture a lion who gives up a hunt to spend half a day tracking a hyena that stole a kill from him a week ago. He burns energy, risks an injury, and goes to sleep exactly as hungry as he woke up. The hyena gains nothing either. Both of them lose. In 2001, Kevin Foster, Tom Wentzeliers, and Francis Ratnieks checked whether biology had turned up, in 30 years, a single convincing case of true spite in an individual animal. The answer was no. The candidates fell apart one by one. What looked like pure harm turned out to be a payoff for relatives or for the animal's own genes. The few cases that survive do not operate at the level of the animal at all. Fire ants carry a gene that makes workers kill queens with a different version of that gene. The queen dies, the workers get nothing, and the copy of the gene sitting in other colonies wins. What is running that spite is not an animal. It is a stretch of DNA that does not care whose legs it uses. The reason is obvious through the eyes of selection. An animal that spends energy on yesterday's enemy instead of on food leaves fewer offspring than the one that simply went and ate. 1,000 generations later, the vengeful line is gone. That is why the lion does not go after the hyena. Not because he forgot or forgave, but because every ancestor of his who would have gone left no descendants. One species did learn to pay that bill, and to pay it for more than itself. In 2015, lions from a pride that all of Britain knew from television were poisoned in the Masai Mara in Kenya. In the Amboseli and Tsavo ecosystem, more than 140 lions were speared or poisoned between 2001 and 2006. In the Maasai steppe of Tanzania, 85 in 19 months. In 2019, Enoch Ontiri and colleagues from the University of Exeter ran 213 interviews with herders to find the motive. There was only one. A lion takes a cow, and people take spears. And they do not go out in the heat of the moment, and often not after that specific animal. Look at what happens to the bill here. For a macaque, it moves from the attacker to his relatives and burns out within an hour. For a human, it moves from one lion to lions in general, from one night to a rule taught to sons, and it lives longer than everyone who was there. Everything else is built out of the same equipment. The witness who comes to court over somebody else's case. The juror deciding the fate of a stranger. The officer who steps into a fight between two people he has never met. The statute of limitations, which is the idea that a bill can be closed even when the debt was never paid. This is what societies larger than a troop rest on. Chimpanzees live in groups of a few dozen, where everyone is either family or a familiar face, and each one settles only his own grievances. The moment a creature shows up who is willing to punish a stranger for what he did to a third stranger, a village becomes possible. Then, a city. Then, a country full of people who do not know each other and trust each other, precisely because somebody uninvolved will step in. No animal carries somebody else's pain as its own, and no animal ever needs to let it go. There is a price for that. The grudge you can hold for 20 years is not something selection ever paid for, but it is the same machinery that lets you stand up for a person you are seeing for the first time. In September of 2023, John Marsloff put the caveman mask back on and walked across the campus, 17 years later. For the entire walk, not one crow scolded him, None of the birds decided anything, and none of them forgave anyone. The crows that knew the mask firsthand had died long before. The generations that followed never saw the threat confirmed, and the response faded on its own, the way a rumor fades once people stop repeating it. The grudge needed 17 years to run out, with no help from any of the birds that carried it. Yours will not run out on its own. You will hold it as long as you want, hand it to your children if you decide to, and it will outlive everyone who remembers how it started. Or you end it today, years before it would have gone out without you.